Thomas Douglas, the 5th Earl of Selkirk, became the unexpected support for displaced families who were evicted from their homes in Scotland. Through his determination and their courage, they moved west to Manitoba, seeking refuge on the prairie.
Thomas, 5th Earl of Selkirk, was an idealist and a philanthropist, and he inherited vast sums of money because all of his brothers died young, and as a result he had a very large fortune, and he used that fortune to charter ships to take struggling Highlanders from Sutherland to Red River Settlement, which turned out to be the beginning of Winnipeg.
The landowners found it far more profitable to turn the land to sheep farming than the original small farming tenants that they had had there before that. The improvement policy was fourfold. They were encouraging wealthy sheep farmers from the south to come up to these vast areas of land where they could set their sheep out in these large sheep walks. There wasn't enough room on this land for the sheep and the people. So at that time, there was a movement to remove the small farming tenants from these inland straths. And it must have been quite a traumatic time.
Thomas, 5th Earl of Selkirk, believed that the clearances were a terrible period in Scotland's history, which brought shame to the Highlands, and he thought that the Highlanders were being offered a very poor deal.
They were encouraging the people to take on these small lots of land on the coast called crofts, and these were linear fields. Now they were no more than 2 to 3 acres. They were deliberately kept small so that the people had enough land that they could grow a few crops and vegetables, but it was kept small enough to encourage the people to go into some other kind of employment. And they were encouraging people to become fishermen. It's kind of difficult for men who've only handled the plough to come down to this coast and take up the oar, and many of them had never seen the sea before.
And so he believed that a much better opportunity for them and their children would be a life in the New World across the ocean in Canada.
The only European settlement in Western Canada was fur traders, and they weren't really settlers. They were there to trade. They weren't interested in establishing a permanent settlement.
Because of his interest in getting Highlanders into North America, Selkirk actually visited North America around about 1803, 1804. And he got to know some of the people who ran the Northwest Company, particularly people like Alexander Mackenzie, who of course had famously been right across the continent in 1793. From Mackenzie and people like that, he heard about Québécois or French-Canadian voyageurs called Les Prairies, the prairies. Of course, Selkirk had been nowhere near the prairies, but he was very taken with the description. And it was at this point that he began to think that perhaps the Red River area was just the place for his Highland colony.
Selkirk had the idea that you could establish a farming settlement of Europeans. In order to do this, he had to get influence in the Hudson's Bay Company, because the Hudson's Bay Company was in charge of all of this part of the world. It was called Rupert's Land. So he realized that he could do things now. He had money in his hands, and he had the knowledge and the imagination to do something. And he persuaded the company that it should go along with a plan for a farming settlement involving Highland Scots.
This was a proposal of assisted passage. He was looking for some hardy, sturdy men to go and set up this new farming settlement in the middle of the prairies in Manitoba at a place called Red River. And this was the first agricultural settlement that was associated with the Hudson Bay Fur Trading Company. And it was quite an important part of the story. And this was really the initiative of Lord Selkirk.
And Selkirk, I think, rather to his credit, thought that at the very minimum he could do something for these people.
And Lord Selkirk heard that nearly 500 people in Kildonan had signed up for a new life, thousands of miles away from Kildonan, a place they'd never even seen before, but they knew that there was land there, and there was land that they could have if they worked hard, and they could continue working in the same way they wanted to. They would be farmers, so it was an incentive for them to go.
Thomas Selkirk didn't revisit as often as he would have wished because he developed tuberculosis and died at a very early age. But the settlers came and they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. It wasn't the first generation which succeeded, it was the second generation which did extremely well, and the third generation succeeded beyond their ancestors' wildest dreams.
Prairie Mosaic is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008, the North Dakota Council on the Arts, and by the members of Prairie Public.